Hi, Tim.
All right.
So let me
Yes.
first introduce you, okay?
Okay. Yes.
Yeah, so my
Yes.
guest today in my virtual studio is Tim Kirby. He's an American who lives in Russia, in Moscow, and works for Russian media for over 10 years now. So my question is, what's going on in Moscow and in Russia in general? I know everything is changing every day. And just up to last week, there was no signs they're going to restrict people's ability to move within Russia. But now we can see the mayor of Moscow made this pass system, so you can
Yeah.
leave or enter Moscow just once a week. How does it work, if it works at all?
Well, so the system basically works like this, where you go online and you use your passport to create passes for yourself. Basically, you get to make you get to travel twice a week for personal reasons. If you have work issues, you get to travel more often. Well, there's this very large, big pass system. And can it work in a city of 16 million people that really depend especially on truck transport to get all the food to stores and basically move everything around? No, most of the time I've traveled a bit, and what happens is you see the traffic police basically around the border of Moscow. You'll have the traffic police who are in theory supposed to kind of create a choke point where they check everyone's passes. It seems like they maybe just pull over certain cars with the wrong number or a bad look about them because you just drive right past without anyone checking.
I
So, for
agree,
example, the
Tim,
last
that
time I
they
made a
can't
pass, no one even
control
looked at
it.
it.
Yeah, it
Yeah,
seems very ridiculous that they want to control such amount of people. So we know that 12 million live in Moscow officially, and 16 million, as you know, live unofficially, and another 7 million outside of Moscow, which is a separate
right.
entity. Yeah, so if all of a sudden they decided to check everybody crossing the Moscow border, it doesn't seem just like feasible task.
Yeah, I don't know. If we look internationally, not just Russia, but across the globe, most efforts by governments to control the quarantine result in being very farcical because, to be honest, most people in the government don't know anything about this issue. Not saying that I'm an immunologist, I do not work as a medical professional, but I would prefer to listen to maybe them about how to do things, whereas there's been this international knee-jerk reaction of how to slow the spread of the virus. Because remember, the governments are not trying to stop the virus; they're trying to make it so that way the medical care systems don't get overloaded. So you all sort of get sick slowly, so they can treat everyone and less people die. That's the actual logic of it. But the results have been just sort of silly and pathetic. And as a parent, I can even say you're allowed to the Moscow government says, yes, you can take your dog outside to walk it, but you can't like go play with your children outside. That's an interesting and very strange priority. So yeah, it's just very strange. Many of the rules and systems being put in place just seem, again, like I said, farcical.
Russia didn't reach its peak, right? So
Yeah.
the number is
Oh,
growing every day.
not really. The problem
No?
is there's a lot of conflicting data, but the one significant number is that vastly less people in Russia have died relative to the amount infected. Why that is, you would have to talk to a medical professional. I don't know, but that seems to be the way it is. The survival rate here is very high.
Can you tell me more about this pass system? You know, nobody, yourself that massive part of Russian economy is a gray economy where
Yes.
employers are legally or illegally are not connected directly to the employer. So definitely this kind of pass system is an extra control, which will
Oh, yeah.
definitely harm these gray companies, and which would hit badly the overall Russian economy. So I can't imagine how they're going to handle this.
Okay, well, if we go back in time to sort of the Maidan period when that happened in Ukraine, there was a very big assumption by Western powers that more than half of the Russian economy was oil. And when Maidan happened, when they hit with sanctions, it seemed very obvious to many people over there that Russia would just collapse. However, there were certain economists in Russia, for example, a Finnish gentleman named John Helvig, who wrote an article saying, no, actually what's happening in Russia is about not half, but 1/6 of the economy is actually based on the whole oil and natural gas thing here. Very different picture. And basically later on, he was able to prove that the damage caused by sanctions and the Maidan and oil prices really did have more of a 1/6 impact on the Russian economy rather than a 1/2. Now, another big part then about the Russian economy that's completely misstated is that even by Russian numbers, roughly 1/4 of the Russian business, the Russian economy, is in what's called the gray economy. Things that really wouldn't be illegal, but people don't pay taxes on them, or someone's just selling something by the side of the street, like not narcotics or murder, more just like, I don't know, reselling video games without a license and without paying taxes would be maybe an example of that, or making interesting t-shirts in your home and selling them, but without reporting it to the government, okay? So that gray economy is something the Russian government has been kind of trying to deal with. Like they have a policy where you can declare yourself as being like self-occupied, being basically samozanятая. Well, I guess it's self-occupied. So anyways, you pay like 4 or 6% taxes. Do whatever you want, whatever income you get, who cares? Just give us 4% and whatever. So the thing is, though, when that's such a huge part of the economy, and according to that particular economist, is actually bigger than oil and natural gas, this coronavirus is really hitting the gray economy hard, and it shouldn't. We need to keep the gray economy. Although people in Europe probably find it disgusting because they love rules and order, I think the gray economy is where you can find the most freedom. You find the most opportunities to gain wealth in Russia. Leave it alone. But now all these rules are completely getting in the way of all these people because they can't say they're going to work or that they're working because technically it's illegal.
How about media coverage in the West and in Russia? You said this, the most surprising factor for you was that this news about Russia providing aid, sending aid to the US for the first time in history reached the mainstream media in the West. What does it mean?
Well, yeah, I myself was actually more pessimistic. I thought when the Russians sent the aid, it would just fall on deaf ears, much like how after 9/11, the first person to call George Bush was Putin. I think the first and biggest monument to the victims of 9/11 was paid for by Russia. But anyway, so I thought it would fall into that category. But no, apparently, yeah, all the mainstream media, Fox and CNN, dove on it. However, there's a new tendency where the American right hates China and the American left hates Russia. So the American left, your CNNs, those kinds, your MSNBCs, they wrote that it was some kind of like the aid, obviously it's a propaganda ploy, it's some sort of collusion, so something negative, it's bad, right? Whereas Fox was actually as conservatives were just sort of like, yeah, they sent aid. But obviously they're not going to say, oh, Russia's so great, thank you so much. They were just like, yeah, they did it. Okay, so apparently really thanks to the new strength of the Russian media, which I guess I'm a part of, has really been able to now actually push certain narratives over there. Whereas 30, even 15, 10 years ago, all narratives came from there to here. You see what I mean? So the Russian media should maybe give itself a nice little pat on the back and continue to try to move forward as best it can.
But what's the difference between the coverages in the West and in Russia? So I know that the Western media like panic, but while Russians, they are just...
Well, yeah, that's a big societal difference here. Going back to the Soviet Union and their media, and even today, usually things in Russia are remain calm. Whatever the situation is, take a deep breath. Let's move forward. Let's take a look at it. Very much Russian society, maybe even outside the media, is this sort of oriented towards being stoic in response to things. Something happens, you don't respond. In fact, one of my favorite things that a lot of Russian politicians do is if you ask them a question they don't like, they just don't answer it. They just absorb it, which is amazing. It's something I've started to do. They call it, in the world of professional wrestling, it's called no-selling. That's a big part of Russian culture, apparently. But when you go to the West, yes, everything is panic. Everything is hyped. And I think that that's why this time there was a bit of that boy who cried wolf factor in America, where we've had swine flu, bird flu, Ebola, what other diseases were. This was going to be the end of the world, the end of America. And then finally, a pandemic level disease actually does happen. And so I think a lot of people in America are already skeptical because the media has overhyped it and tried to create panic so much. So yeah, I would definitely say that one big difference is the American media pushes towards this panic, this crippling level of fear of everywhere around you. Everyone could be a serial killer. Everywhere around you, there could be a school shooting. There's diseases. Fear, 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 fear. The Russian media, on the opposite, is just remain where you are, stay calm, things happen, everything's under control. I would say it's more just sort of like hold the line, men. Sit there, hold the line. Because even in the response to a lot of this coronavirus, it has a little bit of this communist flavor reaction of we're dealing with it, just stand there. Just sit at home, stand there, hold your position, men. We'll deal with it. Which I think is a little bit of a legacy because communist regimes generally always push for inaction among the populace. Like, let us deal with it. We're communist. You sit there and we'll handle this. So in China and like North Korea and Cuba, they often have a similar media response to things. But in Russia, it's very hardcore, the stoic answer. So
nobody in Russia cares about the rules. So I'm pretty sure that nobody is gonna obey the rules
absolutely.
without being strictly punished. You know, as you reminded me that old Russian expression, "We pretend to work, they pretend to pay us." You know, so maybe you please share some kind of stories. What do they do with these order breakers? And maybe some stories became viral.
Yeah, one of the first things that became viral were images of people doing barbecue. Basically, like when the quarantine first started, everyone was sort of like, well, I can't go to work, so let's go outside and barbecue together. And so that became one of the symbols here, along with buckwheat. In America, toilet paper became the symbol of everyone rushing to buy toilet paper. Here, it's rushing to buy buckwheat. But really, in a lot of ways, you can't stop Russians from having fun. You'll never do it. Russian people really don't like rules or anything. So that's why, in a lot of ways, Russia always seems very repressive to Western people because they hear, oh, look at all these laws and the bureaucracy and the rules and this, that. But the thing is, when you don't obey them, they're less repressive. So yeah, obviously, if the government has some sort of fantasy that because they ordered people to stay home, that they're going to an extent they will, but not really. And furthermore, I think on the first day when they issued those passes, 1,000, maybe let's be safe. Let's say 1,500 fines were issued based on those. Again, across a city of 12 to 16 million with 7 million people surrounding it, they had a couple like 1,500 fines. The cost of the fine is $60, which for Russia's bad. Russian salaries are pretty dismal all across the country. That's one thing you have to bite the bullet about when you live in Russia. Your salary is going to suck, but it's still $60. So if you're middle class or upper middle class, you just go outside anyways. Just pay it. So it's a very weird system.
I'm pretty sure that policemen just approach you and say, just like, guys, we just have to remove you and just can you go home and something, yeah? But nobody is doing it.
Well, one of the problems is that here there's different things. First off, in Russia there's really no police patrols. Like as an American, you have this aren't there that the expression the beat cops who walk their beat and sort of go around. In Russia, this sort of exists, but they don't do it very much because Russia. So you don't really see just like police just sort of around. Maybe at the big park by me, they have mounted police who actually do a patrol. But otherwise, there's just sort of no one there. Right. And so I think most of this was really at those border checkpoints on the highway entering to Moscow. Russia's a very car-oriented society, not as much as America, but compared to other European countries, Russia is maybe even the car king. So I think probably most of that were the state highway, the equivalent of the state highway patrol, as we call them in America, pulling people over and looking for passes at the border checkpoints. I think that's probably what it is, because you just don't see random policemen just walking around Russia. It's just not really the way things are done here.
Tim, going back to the media coverages, you said that lately even liberal publications started whining about how America's borders are closed and how poor Mexican workers, migrants can't get in, and American how is gonna starve because nobody is working on the farms.
Yeah.
So, I mean, what's your opinion about this?
Well, the one thing is, yes. So we're talking about liberal publications in America are now starting to turn on the crocodile tears of, oh, the poor migrant workers, they can't work. It's going to be so bad. We're not going to have any food. Well, there's an argument to that, maybe. But now the coronavirus is actually proving to us an interesting intellectual point. Can we live with fairly closed borders? Yes. Some of the economies are taking a hit, but you're looking at, I think one of the worst is maybe America's going to go 5% down in GDP, which, yeah, I guess that's bad, but, and what? So what? America's going to survive that like with no problem. So will Russia, so will China. So this whole sort of idea, this liberal idea of, well, we have to have migrant workers, otherwise, our people won't do anything. It's going to be bad, and no. Well, now it might be time for America to sort of rethink things. I think it's time for the hipster teenagers to go and for minimum wage, go out there and pick those peas. That's one
And
thing that Trump
it's a
could
very
do.
good chance
Because
for
here,
Mr.
an
Trump.
important thing about human psychology, everyone, especially young people, they want to be cool. They want to feel important. And we have this new term called virtue signaling. I think all of us from time to time want to virtue signal how great we are, how wonderful we are. Well, one of the big virtue signaling events of the Soviet Union was when they built the BAM, which is a big railroad out in Siberia. And the whole, whether this is true or not is a little up to debate. But the idea was to just sort of get young people from around the country to come and build this railroad together. Look at
Such
our
a
communism.
romantic times.
Yes, it was very romantic, communist romanticism, but people did show up to do it. And so in a way, now would be the time to try, especially for Trump, who has this make America great again. Well, America was founded on the rugged individual and hard work and all that. And now it's time for him to transform that into the virtue signaling. Now should be the time where virtue signaling isn't making posts on Facebook about tolerance or some BS like that. Virtue signaling is, look at my son and daughter. They're out in the fields. They're earning minimum wage, but they're learning how to work hard the American way, picking those peas. So no foreign people come and take our jobs. Because
Good
especially
opportunity
right now,
for Mr. Trump to make America American again.
essentially, in a way, yes, but that's also a very multi-ethnic America, because anyone can go out there and pick peas, whoever they are, regardless of their nationality. But what I'm saying is, controlling cool is very important. Controlling what people want to do for their virtue signaling is very important. And right now, we're getting proof that America can survive without migrant labor. We need to change things. Oil prices are down. Why not try to get, let's just say, more American-born people, regardless of ethnicity or gender or whatever, to go outside and be the people who replace the migrant labor. Yes, it'll be more expensive, but overall, with the way farming technology works now, okay, you're doing a huge field. I don't know how many people you need, 20, 30? Well, they became twice or three times as expensive to hire an American. But have you seen the size of fields and how few people work in agriculture and how much the yield is? I think it'll really result in some things becoming pennies more expensive at the grocery store. Maybe I'm a little economically naive. Maybe there's some expert who totally disagree with that, but I just don't see where tripling the cost of labor when there's such little labor involved would actually lead to this price apocalypse for corn and potatoes. I just don't see it.
Yeah, Tim, how might Russia benefit from the crisis? Are there any chance benefit from this at all? What's
Benefit
left
from the
for
crisis?
Mr. Putin?
I don't know. Well, the one problem is that I would actually say the government, if there's anything the Russian government has been terrible about currently during the communist period, and before that, at the very sort of dawn of mass media during the Russian Empire, is the Russian government is absolutely terrible at communicating a message with the population. And that's what's happening now. Everything always seems arbitrary what the government does. It's very bad. It's sort of saying, look, guys, we've got this, I don't know, plan or a roadmap, as they like to say in politics. This is where we're going. This is what we're trying. Everything is always usually very vague or forgotten about in a few years. So for the average person, a lot of the things that are happening in Russia just now just seem mental. It's just like, why are we doing this? I don't see sick people around me. What's going on? This is all pointless. And it's a problem of perspective. It's always a problem of explaining itself because, in the West, there's always this, they're criticize Russia. There's some sort of form of enforced Putinism, that there's these Putin ideas being put into place. And actually, it's quite the opposite. Russia sort of is for ideologically sort of flying free, where there is no ideological basis for any decision.
No ideology.
Nothing ever happens in Russia. Well, we believe this. We want to achieve this. Let's make this rule. Things change. Speeding tickets get more expensive. Speeding tickets get less expensive. Well, let's put more police here. Okay, let's move them out of there here. Everything seems arbitrary, and that's a massive failure of the Russian government, who does have the absolute ability to explain itself perfectly to the population, because there is a large amount of state media here. There's also a lot of independent media as well.
But what about the new
it's just
system
very
of
frustrating
taxation for extra rich, super rich Russians?
Well, for them, in some ways, because they're sort of pampered babies, this is very hard for them, because they want to go out and take their flights to Italy and go to all their villas and all that. And now they're trapped at home because they can't fly, because the border is closed for everyone, even if you're rich and powerful. You know what I mean? The flights are not happening. They're only within Russia. So yeah, so the elite in a way are starting to lose their minds, much like the Hollywood elite is, because they can't get the attention they need. They can't live the luxurious lifestyle they need. Yes, their house that they're staying at is big, but they're kind of stuck in place. And so, yeah, I would say the elite is a little bit sad and frustrated right now. But at the same time, I just saw an advertisement today about the whole hashtag sit at home in Russian, Sidi Doma, or Sidim Doma. We're sitting at home, right? And it was all these rich people in their big apartments and big houses saying, it would just be best if we all sat at home until we get through this. Well, isn't that just a middle finger to poor people? Like, I know a guy who rents a one-room apartment in Moscow with one room with 2 kids and a wife. That whole thing. And it's the inability for the Russian sort of elite or the state to project a message to the populace that they're going to believe in. So no matter what anyone tells you about this brilliant propaganda of the Kremlin, not really. Not really. The proof is more in the pudding, and Russians' lives.
Now borders are closed. Yeah. So all these
right.
money movements are under strict control. So now probably it is a good opportunity for Mr. Putin, to check these transactions of the money and increase taxes, or I don't know.
Well, yeah, that's the one thing he did, is basically, in a way, he didn't say this, but he sort of implied it, is that, okay, well, the economy is going to be damaged. Who's going to pay for it? The 1%. And that's another thing so the first thing was a tax on money made through exchanging, like large amounts of exchanged money, and on offshore, sending money offshore. So basically that really major offshore earnings and major earnings based on currency exchanges, that doesn't affect people like you or me. That is really an issue of the 1%. How many of your friends just told you, I just made $7 million on a currency exchange? How many? Not many. So in a way, this crisis has sort of allowed Putin to go after the rich. But then again, remember, that is something that only the more politically involved, more intellectual kind of people in Russia know about. The masses don't know. And that's kind of part of the problem, is I think Putin's really done a good job of badly positioning what he wants to do for the public. Like, he has these amazing constitutional reforms coming up. The reforms are being blocked by the virus, by the way. That the referendum is going to happen later. But it's a really, really good package of changes that a lot of the Russian population has wanted. All the people across Russia who've been standing outside in the snow, single-person pickets with their signs, who want to make these big systemic changes, they're basically getting what they wanted. But because it could involve the loophole for him to stay in power, that's all that gets discussed. That's all that anyone hears about. And it's just so frustrating. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
because many people, including myself, have dreamed of these major constitutional changes, but now everything is being spun into this like Putin loophole when there's so much more to it.
Yeah. So to wrap it up, I heard today from my friend that they might extend the quarantine until June. So do you
Yeah.
think it is really, I mean, really they're gonna do that?
It would be bad for the economy. I don't know. It seems like based on the amount of people who are infected, there doesn't seem to be any point. Maybe keeping the borders closed for a long time would have some value, but the quarantine thing is it's just terrible. You know, some people are losing their jobs, or like I said, we talked about before, the gray economy. They sort of didn't have a real job, but now they're forbidden from doing it. It's tough times. We need to open everything back up, maybe within Russia. Maybe the external borders keep closed for a while, but I don't think that's it's not a good call economically. And sadly, the way the world works, yes, it sounds heartless to risk people's lives, especially elderly people, in order to save the economy. But if the economy gets in trouble, everyone suffers. And terrible
Absolutely.
economic times, like the Russian Revolution, like the 1920s, 1930s, when there were all the reforms going on, and sanctions, and the early 90s, when the economy in Russia was terrible, that's when people were dying the most. Interesting correlation. Keep the
Yeah.
economy good, overall, more Russians stay alive.
Yeah. Tim, thank you very much for your time. It was very informative and emotional interview. Thank
Yes,
you.
that's coded
And
Russian
thank you.
language. I hear
Stay
you. You
safe
guys are
and
always shocked.
well.
Americans, you're too emotional. All right, you take care.